I don't know exactly when it started. It wasn't like in the movies where you instantly get a bad feeling and just know something's off. No, it crept up on me. A slow, creeping thing that only became obvious when it was too late to ignore. At first, it was just a nagging feeling. That little prickle on the back of your neck when you're walking alone at night, the kind that makes you glance over your shoulder even when you know logically there's nothing there. I work late shifts downtown, so walking home alone isn't unusual for me. I take the same route every night, a stretch of uneven sidewalks, cracked asphalt, and dim streetlights that hum faintly against the dark sky. The streets are mostly empty by that hour, with the occasional parked car or flickering neon sign from an all-night deli. That's when I first noticed him. The kid in the hoodie. At first, I didn't pay much attention. He was just some teenager walking a few paces behind me. I remember thinking it was odd that he was out so late, but I didn't dwell on it. It's a city, people are always going somewhere. But then I started seeing him every night. Same kid. Same dark hoodie pulled low over his face. Same slow, deliberate pace, always just far enough behind me that I couldn't call it a coincidence. At first, I thought I was just being paranoid. Maybe he lived in the same direction, maybe he was just a random teenager killing time. I told myself that, forced myself to ignore the way my stomach tightened whenever I glanced back and saw that shadowy figure trailing behind me. But then things started to feel wrong. One night, I decided to test it. Instead of taking my usual route home, I veered left down a side street, a narrow alley lined with closed-up shops, their metal shutters pulled down tight. The air smelled like damp pavement and the faintest trace of cigarette smoke. I walked fast, my heart thudding a little harder than I'd like to admit. And then I saw him. Not right behind me. Not close enough to hear his footsteps. But there. At the mouth of the alley, just standing. Watching. I felt something cold twist in my stomach. I forced myself to keep moving, pretending I hadn't seen him. My hands curled into fists in my jacket pockets. I turned down another street, then another, looping around a few blocks just to be sure. But when I finally reached my apartment building, a worn-down, 3-story walk-up with a rusting fire escape and a front door that sticks, he was already there. Standing just across the street in the glow of a flickering street lamp. I froze. My fingers clenched around my keys so hard they dug into my palm. How the hell did he get there before me? My heart was hammering now. I forced myself to keep walking, eyes straight ahead, breath coming in shallow pulls. The city around me suddenly felt too quiet, like I'd stepped into some kind of liminal space where everything looked normal but something was fundamentally wrong. I made it to the door, shoved my key into the lock with shaking fingers, and twisted. The old metal groaned in protest before finally giving way. I pushed inside, yanking the door shut behind me so hard it rattled in its frame. And then, just as I was about to exhale, a voice. Soft. Too close. I'll give you until midnight. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing. He was standing right there, just beyond the glass of the door. The dim light barely reached his face, but I could just make out the curve of his mouth, a slight, eerie tilt, not quite a smile. The hood cast his features in shadow, but his voice was calm. Too calm. Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night like he was never there. I stood frozen, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My hands were shaking. My keys felt cold against my palm. I stayed up that night, sitting in my darkened apartment, listening, waiting. And when the clock hit midnight, I swear I heard footsteps just outside my door. I didn't sleep that night. I barely moved. I just sat there, in the dark, with my back pressed against the arm of my couch, staring at the door. The only light in the apartment came from the faint glow of the street lamp outside, bleeding through the slats of my window blinds. My phone was on the coffee table, but I didn't reach for it. I didn't call anyone. I just listened. The air in my apartment felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. My ears strained for any sound, anything at all, but the building was silent. The kind of unnatural silence that makes you feel like you're the only person alive in the world. And then, tap, tap, tap. My breath caught in my throat. A knock. Not loud, not forceful. Just 3 soft, deliberate taps against my door. I went completely still. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe it was my neighbor from 2B, the old guy who always forgot his keys. Maybe it was a mistake, someone knocking on the wrong door. But deep down I knew. I reached for my phone with shaky fingers, but I didn't call anyone. What would I even say? Hey, a kid in a hoodie has been following me and now he's knocking on my door at midnight. Yeah, that wouldn't get me very far. Another knock. This time, just one. Slow. Deliberate. I forced myself to breathe. My apartment wasn't big, just a small one-bedroom with outdated appliances and walls thin enough to hear my upstairs neighbor's TV at night. The front door was just a few feet away. If I moved, if I so much as shifted my weight, whoever was outside would hear me. So I didn't move. I just sat there, heart hammering against my ribs, every muscle in my body locked up. And then, the doorknob turned. I watched in frozen horror as it twisted slowly, as if whoever was on the other side wasn't trying to get in, just testing it. Checking to see if I'd been dumb enough to leave it unlocked. I hadn't. The lock held. The knob stopped moving. Silence. I stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, my entire body rigid with fear. Then finally, the footsteps. Soft, slow footsteps retreating down the hall. I didn't move for a long time after that. I just sat there, every nerve in my body on edge, listening as the silence swallowed up the space around me again. Eventually, exhaustion won out. I didn't even make it to my bed, I just curled up on the couch, pulling my jacket tighter around me and let my eyes close. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. But when I finally woke up, groggy and disoriented, the first thing I did was grab my phone. I don't know what I expected to see. A message? A missed call? Some kind of proof that last night wasn't just my imagination running wild? But there was nothing. No texts. No calls. Except a notification. A single, unread message from an unknown number. No name. No contact photo. Just 4 words. You should have answered. I stared at it, my stomach lurching. And then, another one. See you tonight? I dropped my phone. For the first time since this whole thing started, I realized something. This wasn't random. This kid, whoever he was, wasn't just some stranger following me home. This was planned. And it wasn't over. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in sick, my voice hoarse and flat, staring at the unread messages on my phone the entire time. I spent the morning locked in my apartment, pacing between the window and the door, replaying every moment of the past few nights in my head. The Hoodie kid. His voice outside my building. The knock at midnight. The slow, deliberate turn of the doorknob. And now the messages. You should have answered. See you tonight? I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd already made some kind of irreversible mistake. That whatever this was, I had already stepped too far into it. By noon, I was too restless to stay inside. I needed air. Needed to convince myself that the world outside still existed. That it was just a normal day. People going to work. Cars honking. Life moving on. I threw on a hoodie of my own and stepped outside, squinting against the dull gray sky. The city was moving like it always did, strangers brushing past each other, the distant wail of sirens, the smell of rain on pavement. It grounded me. For a little while, at least. I walked for hours up and down familiar streets, stopping in random stores just to linger. Every time I passed a reflective window, I checked behind me. I told myself I was just being careful, that I was overreacting. But every time I looked, I saw nothing. By the time I made it back to my apartment building, the sun was setting and the weight of exhaustion was settling deep into my bones. Maybe the kid had gotten bored. Maybe this whole thing had been some kind of cruel joke, some messed up way for a teenager to get a thrill. Maybe I was safe. I climbed the stairs to my floor, my footfalls echoing in the narrow hallway. The overhead lights flickered weakly, buzzing like dying insects. I was almost at my door when I stopped. Someone was standing at the far end of the hall. Not moving. Not speaking. Just standing. I froze. It wasn't the Hoodie kid. This person was older. Tall. Dressed in dark clothes, face obscured by the shadows. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. I swallowed hard and forced myself to move, gripping my keys so tightly they dug into my palm. I didn't run, I wouldn't give him the satisfaction, but every step felt agonizingly slow. My apartment door was just a few feet away. Just a few more steps. Then, the stranger shifted. A small movement. Barely noticeable. But it sent ice down my spine. I shoved my key into the lock and turned it so fast I nearly snapped it. The door swung open and I stepped inside, slamming it shut behind me. I pressed my back against the door, heart pounding, ears straining for any sound outside. Silence. Then, a single knock. Not from my door. From the wall. The inside wall. The one that separated my apartment from the empty unit next door. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. Another knock. Slow. Deliberate. Then, finally, a voice. Muffled through the thin drywall, but unmistakable. The Hoodie kid. Midnight. I never checked the time so fast in my life. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, my eyes darting to the screen. 11:57 p.m. 3 minutes. I backed away from the door, pulse hammering. My apartment had never felt smaller. The walls were closing in, the shadows stretching, the air thick with something unseen. I didn't know what would happen at midnight. I didn't want to find out. I couldn't breathe. The air felt like it had thickened, every inch of my apartment pressing in on me. My fingers hovered over my phone screen, but I couldn't make myself call anyone. I couldn't even think straight enough to form words. I was frozen. Not out of fear, exactly, more like an instinctive disbelief. How had this happened? What had I done to get tangled in this? I had to be missing something. This had to be a nightmare. A twisted, bizarre, terrifying dream. But the clock was ticking down. 11:59 p.m. I couldn't leave. The front door was locked. The windows? Too high up to jump out of. And the walls were paper thin. I could hear every footstep, every creak in the building. The hallway outside was as quiet as a tomb. But the moment I opened my door, I knew he'd be there. I just couldn't shake the certainty that whatever this was, it was going to happen. That tonight, at midnight, something would change. And then, knock. One sharp, loud enough to rattle the doorframe. I froze, breath caught in my throat. There was no mistake. No more muffled sounds from the walls. The knock was coming from the front door. I scrambled backward, my legs hitting the edge of the couch. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. Another knock. 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 I didn't move. I couldn't move. It was like my body was trapped in place, refusing to react. My eyes kept flicking to the door, to the clock. I couldn't take my eyes off either. 11 hours, 59 minutes, and 42 seconds. The knocking came again, this time more insistent. Knock. 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 It was all I could hear now. The sound of it echoing through the small apartment, the walls vibrating with the force of it. The air was thick with a kind of oppressive quiet, like the whole world had stopped moving. I reached for the door handle. My hand was shaking so badly I almost missed it. But I couldn't leave it unanswered. I had to open it. But before I could even move toward the door, there was a sound from the hallway. A shuffle. I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. They weren't just outside anymore, they were moving down the hallway toward me. The shadowy figure of a person crossing the narrow hallway. I backed away from the door, my breath shallow. This wasn't just some prank. This wasn't some bored kid trying to mess with me. This was real. I could feel it. The dread crawling up my spine. The way my throat felt tight, like I couldn't swallow. Then, the sound of a key turning in the lock. I didn't even hear the door creak open. I only felt it. The cold air seeping in through the crack, the scent of damp wood and old bricks filling the apartment. I couldn't move, couldn't think straight. My brain was shutting down, trying to protect me from the absolute horror of it all. And then, he was there. The hoodie kid. I didn't see his face. I couldn't see it, he was cloaked in darkness, his figure almost swallowed by the shadows at the door. The hoodie was pulled low, covering his eyes. He was just standing there, silent. I couldn't even speak. I gave you until midnight. His voice was so soft, almost like a whisper, but it cut through me like a blade. My legs were trembling, but I stood there, staring at him, trying to find the words to respond. I couldn't ask who he was, couldn't ask what he wanted. The question why was useless, everything felt wrong, like logic was evaporating in the face of what was standing in front of me. His gaze, if you could call it that, under that hood was intense. Knowing. Like he was inside my head, reading every thought I hadn't dared put into words. And then, in one swift motion, he stepped forward. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't move. I couldn't run. Come with me, he said, so quietly it was almost like he was telling me a secret. And I don't know why I did it, but I found myself stepping toward him. I didn't want to go. Not really. But something about the way he said it, so sure, so certain, like he already knew what I would do, made my body move on its own. I reached for the door. The handle. I opened it wide, stepping out into the hallway where the dim lights flickered above me. And then, as if on cue, the hallway light went out entirely, leaving me in near-complete darkness. Click. The sound of a door shutting. I spun around. But the hallway behind me was empty. No kid. No footsteps. Only the faint buzzing of the flickering light above. I had stepped out into something worse. Something I couldn't even begin to understand. And I still didn't know where this nightmare was going. I stood there, the door to my apartment wide open, the hallway now pitch black. My heart was thudding so loud I could hear it in my ears, each beat echoing in the silence like a countdown. I reached out to pull the door closed, to retreat into the familiar, but my hand froze. The last few minutes replayed in my mind. The kid, no, the boy had been standing right there. He had said something, but I couldn't remember the exact words. Everything was a blur now, a nightmare made real. The hallway was empty. Silent. The dim light above me flickered once more before going out entirely. I didn't know if the kid had just disappeared or if I had imagined the whole thing. But I knew one thing, something had changed. I had opened the door and now the world outside felt more like a trap than freedom. I stepped out into the hallway. Every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet seemed to scream in the silence, the sound magnified by the thick stillness. The walls felt like they were closing in, the narrow corridor stretching forever. I wanted to turn back, to slam the door, but I didn't. I kept walking, my shoes making no noise at all on the old wooden floors. I don't know why I kept moving. Maybe it was that whisper in my ear, the one that felt like it was there even when I couldn't hear it. Come with me. It was like a pull, a quiet command. Not from the boy, but from something else. Something I couldn't see but felt. I was halfway down the hallway when I saw it. A door at the far end of the hall, one I had never noticed before. It was different from the others, taller, darker, like it didn't belong. A sharp, sudden pang of recognition hit me, and I knew without a doubt that I should not go near it. I didn't even have to think about it. My feet moved on their own. The air around me grew heavier, colder, the temperature dropping with every step I took. The door was barely a few inches cracked open. I stopped in front of it, frozen. The silence around me felt like it was pressing in from all sides. My body was telling me to turn around, to go back to my apartment, to forget this whole thing. But I didn't. I pushed the door open. The moment I did, I felt it, the pressure. It was as if the walls of the building were closing in on me, the air thickening around me. The room inside was dark, darker than any room should be. I couldn't see a thing, but there was something about it, some dark feeling like it had always been there, waiting. I stepped inside, each footfall muffled by the thick carpet that seemed to stretch endlessly beneath my feet. And then I heard something. A voice. Low but unmistakable. Why did you open the door? I froze again, my blood turning to ice. I wanted to turn around to run, but I couldn't. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move. My breath came in shallow gasps and every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Another step forward. And then, a sudden click. The door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around, heart racing, and the darkness closed in like a living thing. The room was now pitch black, not a single shred of light to be found. I reached out, my hand brushing against something cold and smooth, but I couldn't see anything. The air was damp, suffocating. The silence around me was oppressive, the kind that presses in on your chest. I heard the voice again, this time louder, clearer, closer. Why did you open the door? My skin crawled. The words weren't a question anymore, they were a demand. I didn't know. I stammered, but the words felt hollow. You shouldn't have, came the reply, sharp and cold. Now it's too late. I could feel the temperature drop even more, my breath coming out in visible clouds. My heartbeat echoed in the silence, louder now. The floor beneath me creaked. Slowly. Then the air shifted. A presence. Something in the room was moving. I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, purposeful. I tried to turn back to the door, but it was gone. There was no door anymore. No exit. Just walls that seemed to close in tighter with every breath I took. And then a figure stepped into view. Not the boy this time. A man. Tall, impossibly tall, with a face I couldn't quite make out in the darkness. But I felt him. The way his eyes seemed to lock onto me even though I couldn't see them. The air around me seemed to bend, warping, twisting. His voice was cold, almost mechanical. You shouldn't have opened it. You can't leave now. I wanted to scream. To run. To do anything. But the room was closing in. I couldn't breathe. The last thing I saw was his shadow moving toward me, closer, closer, and then everything went black. I woke up in darkness. At first, I didn't know where I was. I felt like I was floating, my mind still clouded, like I wasn't entirely conscious, but then I blinked and it hit me. I wasn't in my apartment anymore. I was lying on something soft, like a mattress, but it felt wrong. The fabric was rough, coarse against my skin, and the air smelled stale, like dust and something else, something metallic, almost sour. I pushed myself up, my head spinning. My legs were weak beneath me and I had to steady myself against the wall to stop from falling. I blinked into the blackness, but nothing changed. The room was so dark it felt like the light was actively being sucked out of the space. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was something thicker, something heavier, like it was trapping the air in here. Where the hell was I? The last thing I remembered was that figure, the man, tall and shadowed, stepping toward me in that room that didn't make sense. But now that memory felt like it belonged to someone else. Like it wasn't even mine. I rubbed my face, trying to push away the overwhelming sense of dread crawling up my spine. I could barely breathe, my chest constricting with every shallow inhale. The air was so thick, so wrong. It made my heart beat faster, the panic bubbling beneath my ribs. I tried to move forward, but my foot caught on something. I reached down, my fingers brushing against something cold. My breath caught as I pulled it up to my face. It was a small metal box, old, rusted, the edges jagged as if it had been thrown around for years. I didn't know why I was holding it, but somehow I couldn't bring myself to put it down. My fingers tightened around the cold metal, but before I could think more about it, I heard it. A sound. A shuffle. Then footsteps. They were faint at first, but growing closer. Slow, deliberate. Like someone was walking toward me and they wanted me to know it. I wasn't alone. The footsteps were coming from the far side of the room, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The shadows were so thick they almost felt tangible, as if the room itself was alive and pressing in on me. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to stay still. I couldn't let whoever or whatever it was know I was afraid. Another step. Closer. I couldn't hear the breathing, but I could feel it. Like something in the air, tightening the space around me, making it harder to think. Harder to breathe. I backed away, dragging my feet along the cold floor. I couldn't get my bearings. Every direction felt wrong. Every step seemed to push me deeper into the darkness. Click. The sound of a door opening. But there were no doors. There was no exit. I looked around in desperation, my eyes wide, but there was nothing, just an endless expanse of dark, empty space. And then I heard a voice. It wasn't the boy's voice. It was deeper, raspier, and it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. You should have listened. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. They were cold, devoid of any real emotion, but they made my skin crawl. I turned around, scanning the blackness for any sign of movement. My head was spinning and I could barely focus, the dizziness creeping in again, but then a shadow. A flicker. In the corner of the room. For a split second, I thought I saw someone moving. I moved toward it, but the closer I got, the less real it seemed. The shadows twisted and distorted like the world around me was breaking apart. The air seemed to vibrate, buzzing with static, and then a hand. Cold. A hand on my shoulder. I flinched, but I didn't scream. The touch was so ice cold that it seemed to freeze me in place. A voice whispered in my ear, a soft murmur that sent chills down my spine. You opened the door. Now you'll stay. I tried to shake it off, to pull away, but the hand didn't let go. It was heavy, pressing into my skin like it was trying to drag me down into the floor itself. The pressure was unbearable, and for a moment I thought I might collapse under it. Don't, I whispered, but my voice felt distant, muffled. But the hand didn't move. Instead, I heard another sound, faint but unmistakable. A soft thump. And then another. Like something or someone was moving behind me. Slowly, like it was waiting for me to notice. I spun around and my heart dropped into my stomach. There, standing in the corner of the room, was the boy. But he was different now. The hoodie wasn't the same. It was ripped and torn, like it had been dragged through something dirty and unforgiving. His face was hidden, but the aura around him was colder, darker, like it was consuming everything around him. He tilted his head to the side, the darkness making his form shift unnaturally. And then he spoke again, his voice lower than before, colder. You didn't think you'd get away, did you? My whole body froze. The walls seemed to close in on me as he stepped closer. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. This wasn't just about me anymore. I realized with horrifying clarity that I wasn't just trapped in this room. I was trapped in something else. I had opened the door. And now there was no escape. I couldn't breathe. The weight of the room pressed down on me, heavier than it had been before. The darkness was alive now, swirling around the edges of my vision, a thick mass of shadow that consumed everything in its path. The boy, no, not a boy anymore, stood there in the corner, his form flickering like an old, broken film reel, distorting and reappearing in places it shouldn't have been. I didn't know what was worse. The complete silence, or the fact that the silence seemed to hiss with anticipation. Every moment felt like it could stretch on forever, the seconds stretching like hours. And all I could do was stare at him, unable to move. My body was still frozen, caught between the pull of the darkness and the desire to escape. But then the boy spoke again. You're mine now. The words felt like they were scraping against my skin. His voice wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a command, sharp and clear. It wasn't the voice of a kid anymore. It was something else. Something wrong. The room seemed to darken further. The walls pressed in, the ceiling lowering. The floor shifted beneath me as though it was alive, responding to the force of his voice. I felt like I was suffocating, but there was no air to escape to. I needed to escape. You don't get to leave. His words echoed in my head, bouncing off the inside of my skull. It felt like my mind was starting to crack. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. The pressure was building, something was pulling me, pushing me toward him, dragging me into the shadows. I could feel it. The air was colder now, sharper. The edges of my vision blurred as I realized I was slipping. Slipping into a place I shouldn't have entered. And then the pull, it was stronger than anything I had ever felt before. The darkness seemed to reach for me. The boy's form flickered, his features clearer now, his face still hidden beneath the hood, but I could feel his presence as if it was wrapping itself around my bones. His hand, cold and skeletal, reached out, and for a moment, I thought I could see the outline of his fingers stretching toward me. Stay. The command was simple, chilling. And for a split second, I felt my feet move, my body leaning forward. But something inside me snapped. I wasn't ready to give up. I fought. I fought harder than I ever had in my life. The urge to run surged through me, stronger than the suffocating pressure of the room. I had to get out. I would get out. I shoved against the floor, pushing away from the boy. My breath came in ragged gasps as I crawled toward the edges of the room, every inch of space feeling more impossible than the last. The shadows were closing in on me again, but I didn't stop. I had to keep moving. I had to keep going. There was something about the walls that felt wrong now, like they weren't meant to be there. The air felt thinner, almost like I was suffocating. But I reached for the edges of the room, feeling the floor beneath my palms. And then I found it. A door. I hadn't seen it before. It hadn't been there. But it was there now. The handle was smooth, cold, but it was there. I gripped it, not questioning how it had appeared or where it had come from. I twisted it, praying, and then it opened. The room, the darkness, the weight, it all fell away as I stepped into the light. The hallway outside was dim but familiar. The air was breathable again. I could feel my lungs filling with real, clean air. The shadows were gone. The weight that had been crushing me was gone. But something else was still there. The boy. He was standing in the doorway. Not in the corner of the room. Not flickering. He was just standing there, in the doorway, staring at me with those dark eyes I couldn't see but knew were there. "You can leave," he said, his voice like a soft breeze. "But you'll always be mine. You can never escape this." His words were slow, deliberate. They crawled into my brain, leaving behind a gnawing ache. And then he was gone. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. I didn't stop to look back. I didn't want to. I ran. I ran through the hallways, my legs pumping, my heart pounding. My feet carried me out of that place, through the apartment complex, through the street, and into the cold night air. I didn't care about anything else. I just had to get away. I didn't stop until I reached my apartment. And when I slammed the door behind me, I finally felt like I could breathe again. But the feeling of him, that presence, lingered. He wasn't gone. Not really. He was waiting. And I knew deep down that the next time I opened a door, it would be his.